HE News, episode number 8. Happy Halloween and welcome back to Health Empowerment News with CROFT WOODRUFF. Today, trick or treats, the addiction to sugar, and more on the swine flu vaccine. Welcome back to Health Empowerment News with CROFT WOODRUFF. We're here in Vancouver. Happy Halloween, CROFT.
Yeah, it's trick or treat time, except that the treats are the trick.
Yeah, I got your email about Abraham Hoffer's sugar addiction theory.
Well, it's more than a theory. It goes back a long time. It's not just a sugar addiction, of course. It's the refining of food for shelf life, and so doing, they take everything out that will support life, and that's why you very rarely find bugs infesting white flour. Certainly not white sugar. There's just no food value there. And, of course, for you to utilize the white starch and the white sugar, you've got to have vitamins and minerals and amino acids, among other things. Essential fatty acids, too. We might as well throw that in for good measure. And that's just not there in these so-called treats. The bottom line is this. The work was done way back in the late 70s by the University of Alabama School of Oral Medicine, where they used medical and dental students as guinea pigs. And they were given sugar in different forms. It could have been in fruit juice, so you're getting the fructose of orange juice, the sugar of orange juice, or Coca-Cola, or Pepsi, or ginger ale, or whatever. They used a non-sweetened, or I should say a soda, with an artificial sweetener in it, let's put it that way, as the control. And what they found was, and by the way, honey was also part of the experiment too. And what they found that for every teaspoon of sugar, or in the case of honey, or the sugar that you would get in a fruit juice, such as orange juice, your white cell activity would be suppressed by 50%. And when they're talking about white cells, we're talking about particularly the neutrophil phagocytes. These are the white cells that go around gobbling up things that shouldn't be in your bloodstream, whether it's bacteria or fungal spores or whatever. So for every teaspoon consumed, 50% of those neutrophil phagocytes are paralyzed. They do nothing. They don't react. Well, I mean, that's like shutting down your army, say, in Afghanistan by 50%, and expect the other 50% to do the job. Furthermore, it doesn't matter if it's honey, as I pointed out, or fruit juice, or plain white sugar. The only exception was real Canadian maple syrup. And, of course, everybody knows maple syrup. It has that dark brown color to it.
Loaded with minerals? It's
loaded with minerals and vitamins and fiber and other factors that are essential really for utilizing the sugar itself. So what we're looking at is sugar is actually an immune suppressor. And what happens is, as I said, for every teaspoon consumed, 50% of the white cells are shut down for about 5 hours. So if you get about 8 teaspoons of sugar in a 10-ounce can of soda, you're looking at about something like 40 hours of impaired immune function. So is it any wonder that after a summer of ice cream and pop, then capped off with Halloween's trick and treats, that we're now facing the cold and flu season big time? And they can always pretty well predict that it's coming because these are the precursors to this kind of problem.
Well, in the email, Abraham Hoffer is saying that sugar is actually more addictive than heroin.
That's right.
So try and get off the sugar. It is difficult.
And it is probably the most addicting substance. Today, if the rules of drug addiction had been applied at the time that they started refining sugar into what it is today, it would never have been allowed to happen.
Never been allowed on the market.
It would have been illegal, yeah. But you're using the same standards as they use for outlawing heroin, coca, and marijuana.
Interesting, because we're right in the middle of the swine flu vaccination right now, where people are lining up to get vaccinated against H1N1. And, of course, here's Halloween, and what you're saying now is that one of the biggest risks to infection is
excess consumption of white sugar and white sugar products.
Many children and adults are going to be indulging in
quite a bit over the next few days after tonight anyways.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And that's why I say the trick is in the treat. You know, people don't realize what they're doing to themselves by overindulging. And of course, as one who has a sweet tooth, I know what it's all about. And of course, it's interesting that you hear the sugar combine telling us that there's no evidence to show that sugar causes or contributes to tooth decay. I mean, this is tobacco science all over again, is really what we're looking at here when they can make a statement like that. But with regard to the flu season as such, well, what's in the vaccine? We have mercury, and we also have squalene. And the trouble is that, well, of course, the mercury is used as a preservative. The compound thimerosal that is used, it's about 49% mercury. And unfortunately, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and so it is a toxin that will actually irritate the brain cells. It is actually a neurotoxin. And of course, there is plenty of evidence to show that accumulated mercury in the brain, as well as aluminum, which is another element that is found in some vaccines, including the HPV vaccine Gardasil to so-called prevent cervical cancer in young women. You get a real good dose of that. And again, it will get into the brain. And the presence of mercury and or aluminum, one or the other or both, is quite common with senility and Alzheimer's. In the case of squalene, well, squalene is a natural oil. Yeah, it's found in shark liver, but it's also found in olive oil. And the bottom line is this, is that it's used as an excitotoxin. It stimulates the immune system to go and become very active against, unfortunately, not just the squalene that is in this vaccine from shark oil, but also the squalene that you might have absorbed from eating foods like olive oil, as well as the fact that your own body produces squalene. So your immune system can be turned on against yourself. And so you really got a big problem there.
Is it possible, CROFT, that if somebody is taking anything, like let's say they're eating eggs or cheese or something, and they've got that in their bloodstream now, and they go for their vaccine, could it cause a hyperreaction to something else that maybe, could it cause an allergic reaction to
Well, I can't answer directly to that. I can only say this, that we already know that they warn people that if they have an allergy to eggs, that they're not to accept the flu shot. And of course, the question I have is, how many health practitioners that are administering shots ask that question right off the bat? Are people filling out a form before they, go in to get their shot? And is the practitioner reading that form to say, you have an allergy to eggs? I'm sorry, we can't give you the vaccine.
Is that because they are incubated in it?
Well, yes, the vaccines are incubated in either a chicken or duck egg or the embryo of the chicken or duck. And that is how they actually, I guess you would say, incubate the virus. Well, I guess a virus, as it's being incubated and it hasn't been deactivated, it's going to be replicating in this solution. And part of its reformation as it replicates is going to be egg protein, or chicken protein, if you like. Some of that will be incorporated. So it's injected into your body directly. It's bypassing the digestive tract, which is your body's way of censoring things. And other than that, the barrier to these bugs are your mucous membranes, the nasal passages, the esophagus, the whole gastrointestinal tract, and even your eyes. That's why you secrete tears and you have a certain amount of mucus. And all of this is a barrier to any kind of bacteria or possibly viral that could make its way into your body. And so when you use a needle and shove something directly into the body, you've bypassed all that. And it is a real shock. It's not much different than getting bitten by a poisonous insect or stung by a bee or hornet, bitten by a spider or whatever. It's the same concept. And when you have a reaction to an insect bite or sting, that is an immune response right there. And just depending on what is in that vaccine, it will, I guess, determine to the extent that you're going to have an immune response. Some people will just shake it off and there'll be no reaction at all, maybe slight stinging. Others may actually go into shock and faint. And still others may not manifest anything until a few days or even weeks later, and they suddenly find themselves paralyzed and they can't move, and they have to go, and they might even have to be on an iron lung.
You were on CBC Radio, Early Edition, about a week ago.
Yes.
And you were debating Dr. Bowie, I believe.
That's his name, yes.
And he said that we don't have to worry about the mercury because you get more mercury from a tuna fish sandwich.
Yeah, well, except you eat tuna fish sandwich. And again, it's the body censors through the digestive tract whatever you eat. And there's even your lungs, of course, have immune system, IgA, I think it is, or something like that. The long and the short of it is that your lungs also act as a barrier to viruses and bacteria. I mean, that's why you cough and you have phlegm. It's because that's your body's way of throwing these things off out of your nasal and lung passages. And, of course, the mucus is a very powerful and impervious, sticky coating, that can resist stomach acid. It doesn't get digested. So that, and of course, the stomach acid itself is a barrier to these things. And so the bottom line is that you're going to actually absorb more mercury from the shot than you will from eating a tuna fish sandwich. And of course, my response to the good doctor was, well, we don't inject tuna fish sandwiches into the bloodstream directly. And the other thing, of course, is that he's completely ignored the squalene factor. Other than it's in many things, but the trick is that when it's in your body directly like that, it turns your immune system onto that particular contaminant that's now in your system, and the trouble is that your immune system will be further turned on to the squalene that you would produce in your own body, and perhaps even the squalene that might be in the olive oil that's on your salad. You might have potentially an allergy response to that once you've eaten and digested and absorbed it into the bloodstream.
Especially if you're taking these on an annual basis.
Well, that's the other thing. This is an annual insult that goes on, and that's not including the other insults, because if you're a young person, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, where vaccines are compulsory, for instance, in the United States, by the time you hit grade 1, because you get these shots when you're in kindergarten, you might have about 39 or 40 shots. And a fair number of them can contain reduced amounts of mercury. Some may have no mercury, but all they've done in many cases is they just reduce the amount of mercury content in the vaccine. So it's the accumulation. It's more or less the death of 1,000 cuts that you're faced with. And so a person having gone through all that, and they're now in their late teens, and maybe they've avoided having vaccinations for a number of years for whatever reason. They go back into university and find they've got to get lined up, and all of a sudden they're in trouble.
We talked about Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Guillain-Barré syndrome?
Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Yeah.
We talked about that before. The doctor on CTV was saying that there's no connection between vaccines and Guillain-Barré syndrome. That's
interesting that the person would say that. If you get a hold of the insert that is supposed to accompany each vial of vaccine, listing the ingredients or the major ones, and also the contraindications, such as allergy to egg, perhaps, if it's incubated in egg. But sometimes these vaccines are incubated in monkey tissue, African green monkey to be specific, or dog tissue. Do they tell you about that? But more important than that, one of the potential reactions that they admit in the vaccine insert is Guillain-Barré syndrome. Now, if there is no connection, why would they put that in the vaccine insert? But then also the bottom line is this. If the vaccines are as safe as they claim they are, why is it that there isn't a vaccine manufacturer anywhere on this planet who can get liability insurance to cover them for damages that would accrue in lawsuits arising out of adverse reaction, including death?
Well, it's interesting because the manufacturers in this particular vaccine campaign, they got a complete immunity from the government.
That's right. I saw that in the paper. It was in the Toronto Sun. And when the Sun reporters went to the Ottawa officials, it was kind of tough luck. You're on your own. So the onus is on the health practitioner, the one who administers the vaccine. So these doctors who have such faith in the vaccines are likely to find themselves on the hook when it comes to liability.
Interesting.
Of course, they may have an out. Well, you read the instructions, didn't you? You know, that there was this possibility of this, that, or the other thing. So why did you accept the vaccine? You know, the onus is on you, the consumer.
Well, patients don't have to sign a waiver or anything like that, do they?
I can't recall quite because I haven't had a shot since I was about 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why I had that shot is because I had gone into the military, and I was going through this officer training school, and they lined us all up for these vaccines. And that was the long and the short of it.
It was mandatory for your enrollment?
Yeah, it was mandatory for the military. And of course, thereby hangs another tale. The problem that U.S. veterans of the first Gulf War are having with Guillain-Barré syndrome and autoimmune diseases of various kinds, lupus erythematosus. We're seeing problems with Lou Gehrig's syndrome, ALS.
As a result of the vaccines.
And it's associated with the squalene that was in the anthrax vaccine.
And also, you were mentioning before, people are worried about bird viruses. And if we're worried about bird viruses, why are we incubating vaccines in chicken embryos? And
okay, exactly. The fact is, of course, if anybody does a study on virology, they would understand. They would know that bird viruses normally don't jump to humans. And in fact, it is a theory of some of these people that are involved in anthropology, the history of dinosaurs, and the forerunners to the birds that we see today. They theorize that most of these critters were wiped out by viruses for which they had no immunity to. An interesting theory, but it is known that bird viruses normally don't jump to human. The viruses that do jump to human very easily are actually swine viruses, because the tissue of humans is very similar to that of swine. Another reason why humans can tolerate pigs' heart valves in their own heart when they've got a faulty or damaged heart valve. Likewise, that insulin-dependent diabetics can tolerate porcine insulin, that is insulin derived from pig's pancreas, better than they can, say, with maybe bovine-derived pancreatic insulin, simply because some people have an allergy to cow's milk and to beef. And, of course, the other thing is the Humalog synthetic insulin. They have somehow managed to corral human insulin-producing cells from the islets of Langerhans, which are part of the pancreas, and combine that with a yeast molecule, and they're able to synthesize this Humalog insulin using a yeast culture. And people with yeast allergies are in trouble, and they're having a great problem. A lot of people don't respond too well to this Humalog human-based, yeast-based insulin. And there's been a lot written up about that, and you'll find information on the internet about it. But and of course, people are frightened who are in this situation that they can't tolerate that form of insulin, that the manufacturers of the bovine as well as the pork-based insulin are shutting down. And of course, the price, the big promise on this on the Humalog insulin was that it's going to be real cheap. Real cheap. Well, it's a hell of a lot more expensive than the pork-based insulin. So it just shows you the lie that is involved in this sort of, wizardry.
Speaking of wizardry, there's this whole, it looks like an advertising campaign to me in the mainstream media for the swine flu vaccine. And there were a lot of people that were very hesitant to getting it. And then it was reported that 2 children had died. One of them, otherwise healthy, came down with swine flu and then suddenly died. Well, that created a panic, and everybody is now lining up to get the shot.
Except for one thing. How was that child that died, how was he treated when they first realized he had a fever? Because just suppressing a fever with aspirin or Tylenol or the Tamiflu is the worst thing you could do in dealing with a fever. There's a reason why we develop fevers. There's a reason why all mammals develop fevers. That is how mammals deal with viral infections. We develop a fever to kill viruses. Viruses cannot replicate at body temperatures in excess of 99 point something or other, or 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 39 degrees or more Celsius. They cannot replicate. And the reason why is that on the tail end of the RNA or DNA spiral of the viral molecule, because basically we're talking a molecular level, there is an enzyme called a telomere that's heat sensitive. And the virus is inactivated. It can't replicate. Once it's insinuated itself into the human cell, or the cell of any organism for that matter, it takes over, and it takes part of the DNA of that cell to aid it in its own replication, and it uses part of the cell's protein coating to cover itself, so that it will become immune to the organism's own immune system. Because along comes a white cell that gobbles up, a phagocyte, I guess you'd call it, gobbling up bacteria and other things that shouldn't be there, comes up against this now disguised virus. The white cell's fooled into thinking that it's one of us, so it's ignored. And the only reason why this can only go so far is the body has a mechanism where it detects that something is wrong, there's just too much of this, and so it goes into fever mode. And the result is that the body will get through the fever. So the old saying, you feed a fever and starve a cold, has great credence. Because for one thing, even the ancient people on this planet knew this, hence their sweat lodges, their propensity for using hot springs, and saunas in case of the people of the northern climes, the Laplanders. And that was their way to help get over a fever, is to feed it. And of course, I know that in my grandparents' day, my grandmothers on both sides of the family, they knew what to do, and I learned this. And I learned it through my own parents. You got a fever, you keep the patient well covered with blankets. Even wool socks on the feet don't hurt. Usually a sock around the throat, a cold pack over the head, over the forehead, and at the back of the neck, so that you're keeping the brain cool, because that's where the blood is going, it's from the main part of the body into the brain. And the result is that prevents you from going into convulsions, and of course it burns out the virus. And the other thing is keeping the patient well hydrated, usually with a nourishing broth, chicken broth. So there's more truth than fiction to chicken broth being or chicken soup being Well,
there's a lot of truth to the old wives' tales, I suppose.
Well, there's more truth than fiction to a lot of these things, and of course, when you suppress a fever, that's the worst thing you're going to do. And I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts that that's what killed that kid in Ontario. He was 13 years old, right?
Yeah, he was
yeah.
hockey player, healthy.
Yeah. And, he went into fever mode, and they suppressed it and killed him. Of course, we ought to look at Tamiflu. Right now, through the U.S. courts, at least since the last time I've been able to dig it up, and that was about 2005, there's about at least 24 cases of a condition called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. There's some other related skin conditions that Tamiflu can bring about. And and it can cover 100% of the whole body, 100%, that's fatal. That's like having a bad burn. You get 80%, 70%, 60% burns over the body, you've had it. And I've seen pictures of smallpox cases that didn't look as bad as this Stevens-Johnson syndrome. And the bottom line is that that's what Tamiflu can cause, among other things, as well as causing the person to die from the infection.
Allowing the infection to spread.
Yeah.
The statistics for the swine flu so far, the deaths are, relatively small compared to other conditions, other diseases. The seasonal flu apparently claims 8,000 people in Canada a year.
I would even dispute that, really, because
could be
the death could be to other causes, but they'll blame it on the flu.
Could be pneumonia.
Could be pneumonia. That's the
infections.
Old person's friend, they say.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, if they're trying to suppress the fever, they'll kill them that way. It's not necessarily the flu that killed them, but suppressing the fever that put them over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with the problem with the SARS, this super acute respiratory syndrome, worldwide there was just under 8,000 cases, and worldwide there was just slightly under 800 deaths that were attributed. And of course, how many of those deaths were because the doctors and nurses didn't know what they were doing in trying to suppress the fever with these antipyretic or anti-fever drugs, and of course, good old Tamiflu.
Mm-hmm. Whatever the cause of death, we're looking at a huge disparity in the figures here. 8,000 deaths from seasonal flu. Mm-hmm. 81 deaths so far for the swine flu.
Yeah.
So we're talking about...
We got about, 4 months to go with flu season?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, to me, what we're looking at is the pharmaceutical industry. They've had some bad hits in recent years with regard to libel costs, damage from their various drugs. I mean, since 1999, we're looking at probably about 12 to 15 different drugs and probably about 3 or 4 vaccines that have killed an awful lot of people off or incapacitated them permanently in one way or the other. And they've had to pay out it's not billions, but tens of billions of dollars. And it looks to me like this is a very nice way for the vaccine man. We're looking at, one of them is GlaxoSmithKline. Another one is Merck. And we've got Sandoz and AstraZeneca. And I mean, I can go on and on. These companies have all had to pay out liability costs because and the insurance companies won't pay it. They won't give them insurance for these things. And, of course, this has been quite a hit on their bottom line. So governments are now very kind by promoting these vaccines. We've got, 35 million Canadians, eh? And they've ordered enough vaccine for all of us, apparently, the feds have. 35 million times. And what does it cost for a vaccine shot? I think it's about $25 maybe or more. $25 times 35 million. You do the math. I'm not so good at it.
It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. It looks to me that we're getting into, in fact, no, it is a heck of a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And so that's one way. That's payback time to replenish their bottom line. As it is, the vaccine manufacturers, and that's that incorporates the whole drug industry, the big pharma. The top 10 of the S&P 500, that means they're the top earners. They make in the mega bucks even better than General Motors or the cell companies and whatever. The top 10 are all pharmaceutical companies.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you put your money if you want to make money.
They make close to, I don't know if it's still a valid statistic, but a few years ago, the top 10, which were all pharmaceutical companies, made more than the bottom 490 combined.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how big they are.
Well, you look at a country like the United States where you have 320-odd million people, and they make vaccinations mandatory as they are just for the school children themselves and for a lot of people who want to get a job in industry or in the university or whatever, but they make it mandatory for everybody. Well, that's 300 million times the cost of the vaccination. Now, there's the price of the vaccine itself, which might be $25, but the U.S. government, because of the liability which they have now assumed for vaccine injury, there's I think it's about a $14 or $15 surcharge for each vaccine that is administered, and that's paid by the consumer or else by Uncle Sam himself. So you multiply that by hundreds of millions, and we're talking trillions now.
Mm-hmm. So there's big money in it.
Of dollars,
the mainstream media is promoting it as if it was an infomercial. Get your flu shot, get your flu shot.
Well, they're also getting advertising dollars from the big drug companies too, aren't they? And that's one reason why you find them very, very reluctant to have anybody on that would be critical of this whole immunization policy or just critical of drugs, if at all. You can recall that not too long ago, Alan Cassels and his counterpart at the University of British Columbia, they were going to be dumped because Big Pharma was putting pressure on the provincial government. Big Pharma did not like what these two gentlemen had to say about these drugs.
Well, even on CBC, when you were on CBC debating Dr. Bowie, I listened to the rest of the program, and when I went to the news, they talked about how there was a debate earlier about the pros and cons of having the vaccine. Mm-hmm. The only segment they played was Dr. Bowie saying how safe it was at that point.
That's news management, you see, and I'm really surprised that CBC would do that because they're always they weren't going to have me on if they couldn't find somebody to come on with me, and they finally come up with this Dr. Bowie. But I'm afraid that Dr. Bowie, I don't think much of him as a scientist, and his knowledge of virology, and he's supposed to be an immunologist, you know. Mm-hmm. First of all, he's going around, won't shake hands with anybody. At least Rick Clough wasn't afraid to give me a handshake. Good, solid. He's got fifths like a ham. And but the bottom line is that viruses don't survive very well out on open surfaces and that. Bacteria might, but not viruses. Viruses don't like sunshine. Sunshine destroys them. Even full spectrum lighting. If there's any ultraviolet rays in the lighting, it will oxidize the virus and destroy it. And of course, they don't like heat. We already know that. And of course, a certain amount of good personal hygiene doesn't help. But one of the big problems with modern man today is that he's too sanitary, so that when a bug does come along, and we can talk about the flesh-eating bacteria, which, by the way, is related to the particular type of virus that hangs around your nasal, your mouth and your nasal passages. That's a pretty nasty one if it gets into the skin. And flesh-eating disease is more, of course, it's antibiotic resistant now, so it goes on a merry old time. Of course, they never heard about giving an IV of vitamin C to the person that's got that, and had the doctors known that with regard to the former deputy to our friend Brian Mulroney, the French-Canadian who lost his leg to the flesh-eating disease. Can't think of his name right now. But had the doctors known about vitamin C, he may not have needed to lose his leg. Mm-hmm.
Hyperbaric oxygen might have helped for that too.
That's another antiviral and an antibacterial. Oxygen, hyperbaric, which of course means oxygen under pressure. Ozone, which is just oxygen with an extra molecule. And hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O with an extra molecule of oxygen. So you got H2O2. It's a great antiseptic. And there are doctors who know these things, and they will actually take the blood out of the body and run it through an ozonator and put it back into the body. And great stuff, same thing with hyperbaric oxygen, except they're just doing it through the lungs. They can also do it rectally as well. And of course...
Also UVB as well. UVB.
Yeah, ultraviolet B ray, yeah.
Removing the blood and putting it through a UVB.
That's right. There's
treatment.
a doctor now retired that used to do that in the Fraser Valley. He had a great success with cancer patients using that therapy. Mm-hmm. One of the less kept, or perhaps we'll say one of the better kept secrets of alternative medicine or therapy in this province.
Mm-hmm. I got a call from a friend of mine who had seen that same CTV segment where they were going over the statistics. Mm-hmm. And he was angry. He said, "What's the big deal about the swine flu if there's 8,000 deaths from the seasonal flu, mm-hmm. and there's only 81 deaths so far from the swine flu?" And they went through the statistics. They listed the likelihood of mm-hmm. death, and they basically said that you're just as likely to die from a car accident as from the swine flu.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's just like they don't have a vaccine yet for hepatitis C. And hepatitis C used to be referred to as serum hepatitis. This is a form of hepatitis that you get from contaminated blood. Never mind hepatitis B, which, of course, is another, blood can be another source of that particular viral entity. Way back in the early 70s, 1974, there were doctors in the Osaka region of Japan in 2 hospitals that wiped out serum hepatitis, that is hepatitis C, just by giving patients who were slated for major surgery and very likely blood transfusions, they were giving them something like 6,000 milligrams of vitamin C for several days prior to and for a couple of weeks after the surgery and the blood transfusion if they needed it. They had found that by investigating the dietary habits of these patients who were having major surgery and going through blood transfusion as a result, only 15% out of 100 were coming down with hepatitis C. And they investigated their diet and found that those who didn't come down with hepatitis C after a contaminated blood transfusion, it was because they were taking lots of vitamin C in their diet and their choice of food as well as supplementation. And that's why they turned around and said, okay, you're slated for major surgery and unlikely you'll have to have a blood transfusion. This is what you have to do. You take the vitamin C in these amounts before and after. They eliminated 100%. Just vitamin C as a supplement. And we know that vitamin C as an IV does the same thing, even more so. I've seen people snatched away from death by an IV of vitamin C by medical doctors right in this province. But, oh no, that's not proven, says the College of Physicians and Surgeons. We're going to take away your license for doing that. Take away a doctor's license for saving a patient's life when other doctors refuse to use that protocol and would rely on something like, who knows what, some highly toxic drug.
No, there's a lot more profit in that than vitamin C. Well,
it's just like the cancer treatment, Erbitux. It costs about something like a little over $1,200 a week for the therapy. And after 12 months, the tumors have shrunk or disappeared, but the patient's dead.
Well, that's a successful treatment.
Yeah, well, they'll put it down as a success. In fact, there were some provincial governments that were reluctant to take it on, but you had the claque out there, no doubt supported by Big Pharma. Oh, we got to have Erbitux. And so the suckers in the bureaucracy and the politicians buy into it. Somebody gets up in the legislature or parliament fulminating against the health department for not approving Erbitux as a treatment for cancer.
It's interesting because you hear all sorts
taxpayers' money. You
hear all sorts of little blurbs that come out on the news bites that come out on the news saying that this has been found to be effective against cancer. This has been found to be effective against cancer, but then you never hear about it.
We hear about curcumin, which comes in turmeric.
Mm-hmm. The latest one I heard was an enzyme from the venom of an African tick. Mm-hmm. They've been able to isolate the enzyme and reproduce it. Mm-hmm. And
it eats the cancer.
It doesn't kill healthy cells, but it kills cancer cells. So, these things you hear about, but then they kind of disappear. And
they've got a patent. They got to get a patent right to it, and that might be difficult. And then they've got to go through all the hoops of different tests. And usually the tests, the cost of the tests are not worth the investment. And so they don't bother. It just dies out. That's why they won't do double-blind studies on things like Laetrile, for instance, carbamazepine. There was another formula by Dr. Andrew Ivy, who is I think that's the name. He was a respected professor of medicine at the University of Illinois, and they railroaded him, and he just died a couple of years ago. I'm sure a very embittered man, because he had something that actually worked. I mean, why would he put his career on the line if he didn't feel and genuinely feel that he had something that was worth investigating and using?
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole problem with our system. Our definition of insanity for this society is totally insane. Something as simple as vitamin C can kill viruses. And if anybody wants to immunize themselves against the flu, aside from cutting down on the tricks that they're going to get from the treats tonight, they are cutting down on the treats that they'll be tricked into getting tonight or giving. They should be taking vitamin C in fairly large amounts, actually. But, of course, I'm now practicing medicine without a license. But vitamin C is an essential nutrient, and we don't get enough of it in a standard North American diet. We have to supplement. It would be nice if they would fortify all these foods with lots of vitamin C. That would be something. And vitamin C is cheap. You can go to a pharmacy and like Cripps, for instance, and get a kilogram of vitamin C. That's 2.2 pounds of vitamin C as pure ascorbic acid for about $40. If you don't like the acid, you can get it as a salt of sodium ascorbate, or calcium ascorbate for a few dollars more by the kilogram, and very easy to take. You can, put a quarter of a teaspoon is about 2 grams, so you can put it into coffee or juice or drinking water. You can mix it into your salad dressing and put it over your salad. There's all kinds of things you can do with vitamin C.
Vitamin D as well for
the sunshine vitamin. Well, it's antiviral. We know that. Mm-hmm. The sunshine itself is antiviral, but apparently so is the vitamin D. And there are studies afoot that seem to indicate that vitamin D boosts our immune system against bacterial and viral infection. And there is a body of evidence that would suggest that it also protects us against certain kinds of cancers. Now, I noticed that there are arguments out there to the contrary. But certainly we know this, that in a 20-minute period with full body exposure to the morning sun, you can produce about the equivalent of 20,000 international units of vitamin D on the skin, which is absorbed into the deeper tissues, and the body takes it up through the bloodstream, and it gets processed in the kidneys and the liver, I presume, and maybe in other organisms I don't know about. But the bottom line is that 20,000 international units, you may not use all that, and I'm sure a lot of it just deteriorates and dissipates. But obviously, whatever the body can make would suggest that maybe we need a good portion of that. And there are time-trans studies that show geographically, as you move further north, the more susceptible you are to the multiple sclerosis. Oh, by the way, we mentioned the squalene. It's associated with amyloidic lateral sclerosis, ALS, Lou Gehrig's syndrome. There is some evidence that vitamin D deficiency may have a bearing on that condition among some susceptible people.
Interesting. So we're pretty much out of time. For the people who are confused right now, and there's a lot of them that are confused about whether or not to get vaccinated with the H1N1, what would be your strongest argument against getting vaccinated?
Well, the fact that they're lying about the mercury and the squalene, the fact that if you accept the vaccine and run into difficulties with your health or worse, you have no recourse to sue the manufacturer. They don't have any liability insurance, and they got deeper pockets than what you have to fight a court case. and the federal government says, well, you're on your own, so the onus will be on the health practitioner. I would say, well, to the health practitioner, well, are you prepared to sign an affidavit that in the event I should have an adverse reaction to this vaccine, from very serious to perhaps death, that you will be liable and be responsible for the dissolution of my estate and taking care of my heirs, and you will sign a paper to that effect in view of the fact that the government won't assume liability, nor will the vaccine manufacturers, nor will any insurance company. So there it is. They won't sign it. So if they won't take a chance, why should you? That's number one. And of course, we already mentioned the mercury and the squalene in the vaccine, but there are other things that we have to talk about, and that is the lack of scientific evidence that the vaccines even work.
And for people who decide not to, what can you recommend them to do to keep their immune system strong?
Stay away from refined food and refined sugars. Eat lots of whole foods, lots of fresh vegetables and salads and greens, anything with high amounts of vitamins and minerals in it. They should drink lots of water, and they should cut sugar out of the diet totally for the next couple of weeks. And if they incorporate back in the diet in very moderate amounts, and watch out for Christmas and New Year's, because that's another time when people really pack in the candy and the sugar and the refined food. And there it is, and it goes on, and then Easter is the next time around. And of course, if there are any other religious holidays where they bring out the sweets, you're just, building up your body to be receptive to infection and breakdown. Body can only handle so much of this stuff.
Well, there you heard it. No sugar, whole foods, vitamins,
vitamin fortification,
minerals.
And by the way, when it comes to buying a vitamin supplement, especially a multiple vitamin, forget about these ones that say 1.2 or 3 milligrams of B1, B2, or B3, and the other B vitamins. B12 will be in micrograms, and biotin will be in micrograms, and folic acid, if you're lucky, might be 1 milligram. But if the biotin, rather more important, if the folic acid is less than 1 milligram, forget it. If the B vitamins are less than 25 milligrams, exceptions being B12 and biotin, which will be in micrograms, and of course the folic acid will be in 1 milligram, then you're wasting your money. You want to get a multiple vitamin that is very potent in the B vitamins, because that is where it's at, as well as taking extra vitamin C, because the 100 to 250 milligrams you might be lucky enough to find in a multiple vitamin mineral, as far as I'm concerned, is just skirting the surfaces of immunology. You want to take 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams, and maybe several times a day. If you are allergic to vitamin C, if you take too much, the worst thing that can happen is it will have a laxative effect. And as Linus Pauling once said, when he was criticized for taking 18 grams of vitamin C a day, he was doing it in divided doses throughout the day. Who wants to keep that mess inside you?
And that wraps it up for this week. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you have anything to say in regards to this episode, please go to www.foodsornotdrugs.com, and you can leave a comment in the comment field for this episode. If you have any suggestions or ideas that you would like us to do in future episodes, please email me at andrew@foodsornotdrugs.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And that's it for this week. We'll see you again soon.
And there we are.